Hello and welcome to our podcast, Europè. I'm Saleh Mousavi, a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Louvain, and today we have a pleasure of having Professeur Tronto as our guest. Professor Tronto, I believe you had a conference this morning at KUL.
It was actually last week.
Last week, okay. But I know that you will be giving another conference at 8 p.m. here in Louvain.
That's correct.
Yeah, and despite your busy schedule, you have kindly agreed to participate in our podcast, and I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you very much. Allow me to introduce our podcast to our viewers. I had this idea to create a more engaging and welcoming environment for communicating philosophical messages to society. I realized that it is possible to benefit from international philosophical figures who are at our university to give a conference or another official event to participate in our podcast. I wanted this podcast to have a scientific value, but I also wanted it to be more accessible to our viewers, both inside and outside the academia. I shared my idea with Professeur Nathalie Frognaud, and as always, she accepted my proposition. With her help, today we are recording our first video podcast. I did a first episode that was audio-only podcast with Professor Michel Fabre, a philosopher of education. Mm-hmm. But today we have your premiere.
You have me, sorry.
Thank you very much. Our first video podcast with you, Professor Tronto, which is really an extraordinary opportunity for me and for our podcast. I want to thank Professor Nathalie Frognaud, also Director of Europè, the Researcher Centre of Practical Philosophy at University of Louvain, and Institut supérieur de Philosophie, and particularly Cécile Laillé, who is our expert in media. First, little introduction of Professor Tronto. Professor Tronto is a Professor Emerita of Political Science at City University of New York and the University of Minnesota. In her important work, Moral Boundaries, a Political Argument for an Ethic of Care, Professor Tronto argues for a public and political concept of care. From Moral Boundaries to her more recent book, Caring Democracy, and over the past few decades, because of Professor Tronto's work, care became an important concept in political philosophy. This has led to consideration of political as a relevant criterion for rethinking democracy. In 2021, she received an honorary doctorate from University of Louvain in recognition of her works in political philosophy. We are pleased to welcome her back to Louvain today for her conference entitled The Revolutionary Potential of Caring Democracy. The special number of Revue Philosophique de Louvain, which has devoted to her work, will be presented to her on this occasion. Let's start with Louvain. What's your idea about this utopian conception of city and campus, university campus? You know, Louvain is really it is a result of the conflict.
Yes,
the language conflict. Yeah. What's your idea about this campus?
Well, the campus itself is it needs more green, I think. It's a lot of concrete, but I love the idea of organizing space so that people live together and work together in a way without cars. Mm-hmm. Now, other cities catch on and try to take the cars away from the centers of the city and make it possible for people to use the center of the city rather than the cars. Mm-hmm. They are behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's one of the much more important example of this.
Yes.
This urbanistic vision about the completely pedestrian city.
Yeah.
And in my way of thinking philosophy, it benefits me, because here we have a really isolated way of life, but we concentrate in philosophy, and the possibility of seeing another person from another faculty is also very important here in Lebanon.
That's right, and the faculties are all very close together, exactly. So there's a lot of opportunity for interaction.
Exactly.
Does that mean there is a lot of interaction? I don't know, but you can hope.
Yeah. It is a city of the movement.
Yeah.
The students all the time, they are walking.
There's constant movement.
Exactly.
Even in the rain.
First question, why should care be a subject of political philosophy?
Yes. So for the most part, it has not been. Mm-hmm. Okay, now, we could talk about this, right? Mm-hmm. I think Plato's Republic is in part a book about care, mm-hmm. right? When he sets up the country, when he sets up his ideal state, the goal of the guardians is literally to make sure that the population is mm-hmm. taken care of. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say that I agree that philosopher kings should make these decisions for everyone, but it's the case that he was trying to solve the problems of too much conflict among people. Mm-hmm. He was trying to solve the problems of great wealth. He was trying to solve the problem of struggles between people, and he believed in women's equality, strangely enough, unless you think that's a joke, which I don't. Okay, so there, Plato talks about this. Aristotle says there's a separation between the household and the polis. Mm-hmm. And this model of the separation continues throughout Western thought for the most part. When I became interested in feminist issues and the way men and women relate in society, it suddenly occurred to me, well, it took me a while. I'm a slow thinker. It suddenly occurred to me that the issues of care, of who manages to make sure that humans can live properly, is not only outside the realm of political life, but it's also outside the realm of political and social theory. Mm-hmm. Political and social theorists construct a world as if we began, think of the social contract tradition, as if we start as rational, autonomous, free individuals. Mm-hmm. That's not how we start. We start as helpless, dependent babies. Mm-hmm. And somehow those helpless, dependent babies become the people who then are able to be citizens. Mm-hmm. But if you don't think about the first part, you can't think about how it influences our capacities. Mm-hmm. And so once I realized that, I said, I see what this requires us to do. We really need to rethink political philosophy, political theory, as if care matters, as if it's a part of what we have to talk about. Mm-hmm. And it hasn't been not talked about, it's simply been left aside. Mm-hmm. And there are all kinds, once you start looking at the history of political thought, you can reread them as theories of care, mm-hmm. right? And not necessarily good theories of care. Slavery is a system which is designed to organize care. It's also an economic system, but it's designed to organize the care. And again, in Aristotle, we read why slavery is a good thing. It's because some people are only good enough to help others live their lives, mm-hmm. so that they have the leisure to engage in more important work like philosophy. Mm-hmm. If you believe in equality, you cannot accept this view of this, and you have to think again, how are we going to organize care so that everyone can participate in society?
Mm-hmm. For having a more just society, problem of justice and equality, it is so important here, because all political philosophy has a notion of care.
Yes, but some of them think that care means some are designated to be the carers and others are more superior. Mm-hmm. It's, by the way, never that the caregivers are the superior and the others.
Yeah, it's so important, this relation.
Yeah.
In my mind, when I read your book, it is this relation, the imbalanced relation of power between caregiver and care receiver, that will be another question. About the possibility of care during a period of crisis, because it is so important to think about the possibility of care in the period of crisis. As you know, we are currently living in a crisis, yes, including crisis of ecological crisis, political crisis, all kind of crisis. But it appears that during crisis, people tend to prioritize caring for their loved ones.
Yes,
in public space.
Exactly.
And how care is possible during period of crisis and difficult conditions?
Well, in the first place, we get into these crises because we have not cared enough in the past. Think about it. The environmental crisis is caused by the idea that we can just pollute, we can just spread garbage, we don't need to clean up after ourselves. We don't need to take care of the earth, it knows how to take care of itself. If you think that way, then you end up in an ecological crisis like we have now. So it is possible that part of the reason we're in states of crisis in the first place is because we have not cared properly in the past. But the second piece of this does have to do with, well, under what conditions then can we make people stop being so narrow-minded? I call it parochialism in the text. How can we keep people from being so parochial in their care? And the answer is, everybody needs to feel safe. The most basic thing that you need in care, Plato called them guardians, the most basic thing you need is to feel safe. Parents want their children to be safe, above all. Yeah? And the way to become safe varies. In times of crisis, Americans use this metaphor, which is a really awful one, of circle the wagons. Make all the wagons in the wagon train because the native people are attacking. Put all the wagons in a circle and then we'll be safe. And this expression, circle the wagons, is kind of a standard piece of political vocabulary. And it means we will take care of our own and too bad for everyone else. So this circle the wagons mentality comes because it's much easier to activate people's fear that they will not be well cared for than to ask them to rethink how they're doing their care. Care is so underexplained and underexplored that we don't recognize that if we all just made sure that everyone was well taken care of, we would be okay. There's an American political actor named Paul Wellstone. He was a senator from Minnesota. He died tragically, actually, in a plane crash going to a campaign appearance. Otherwise, he would have gone much further than being an unknown senator from Minnesota. But he had this wonderful expression. He said, "We all do better when we all do better." It's so simple to say, yeah? And that idea that if we were able to make sure that everyone were well cared for, we wouldn't be in such awful conditions is a really powerful idea. So the way out of crisis is to try to get people to let go of their fear and recognize that we all do better when we all do better. Now that's a big leap for us because it means that we have to be open. And in order to be open, we have to give up our anger and our prejudices and our fears. Very difficult to ask people to do, but it is possible.
How it's possible? It's education? Or?
Well, education is one way that you can do it, but you can also do it when you're already in a crisis. You can do it by asking people to think differently, by the movement to prohibit alcohol in the United States in the 19th, 20th century, early 20th century was actually successful. They managed to get prohibition started. And the slogan that they used was, "Do everything." Should we use hatchets to break down saloons? Yes. Should we argue for women's right to vote? Oh, yes, good idea. Should we go to church? Yes, do that too. Just do everything. as long as you know the right direction to go, which is we need to be more caring towards others, there are many possible ways to do that. Yeah, you could do it through political parties and asking them to organize their platforms in ways that are more caring. You can do it through civil society organizations. You can do it through the arts by asking people to meet others. You can create conditions for people to meet others. There are all kinds of things that you can do if you are committed to making these things happen. It's possible, but it's hard work, and it's not easy. So there was one small town in Minnesota where suddenly there were many migrants, and there was beginning to be trouble. And some of the women said, "We're going to do something to fix this." And along the way, they started to just befriend the women from Somalia who were walking down the sidewalk. Well, there wasn't a sidewalk. Walking down the road in their veils, and just stopped and said, "Are you on your way to the grocery store? Let me take you with me, and then I'll bring you home." Now, that's a very small act, but it's an act of extraordinary kindness to someone who's walking in the cold. And then the friends of this person began to say, "Now you spend all your time with your new friends, and you don't spend time with us." And now, she was very honest about the ways in which doing something had a real impact on every aspect of her life. And it was difficult for them. But they said, "Well, okay, then we'll have a dinner and we'll invite all of our friends. Our new friends, our old friends, we'll all get together." So there are ways of working these things out, but it's always a problem. But this is the reason you can solve it. Caring is always a practice. And this is a different kind of philosophical position, right? We usually think in philosophy, okay, I've got a solution, now I do it. But in fact, if you're thinking in terms of practice, as the practice goes along, it always changes. And as it changes, it evolves. And as it evolves, you get better at it. And you begin to see more. And you begin to recognize, oh, there's also this we have to take into consideration, and that. And then, if you're caring really well, you'll actually be listening to the other person as well, and hearing them say, oh, I have this problem I need to solve now. And once you get to that point, again, you can begin to turn it from a vicious circle into a virtuous circle. Yeah.
Talk about this necessity of changing mentality about care, about this public vision about, public conception about care.
Yes.
But I'm talking about I think, much more important or much more extreme version of crisis, which is living in a tyrannical political system.
In what?
Tyrannical.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In a system which is not possible to have a political action, or have this experience of practicing care. How would care be provided in a tyrannical political system?
Yeah, so tyrants give care based on the position of your relationship to the tyrant. Yeah,
exactly.
If you are in favor, then you get cared for, and if not, then not. How do you fix that? You subvert it from within, and you work to change the system. Right? It's not easy to do, because it's so seductive to be the one who is supported. Yeah. And on the other hand, there's something, on some level, people know that these tyrannical systems are fundamentally unfair. And when they fall, they fall. They really fall apart.
But they are working to, I think they are attacking this self-confidence to, you cannot provide. You cannot provide for...
Exactly.
You cannot care.
You cannot do anything without our support.
Exactly. And I'm only one who can care for you.
Yes, that's the other piece of it. Yes, yeah. And under those conditions, it becomes extremely difficult for people to stand up to it. And here's some of the standing up has to become what long ago was called the powers of the weak. that you resist in subtle ways, but ways that are recognized and understood by others. Yeah, it's very difficult. It happens in households. It happens in back rooms. It doesn't happen in full view of the state, because the state thinks it's powerful, it can see everything, but it can't.
I think in that situation, we return to that old conception of private care. I care only for my family.
Yes.
I care only for... that was it. And there is no possibility to have a public conception of care, I think. That is return to old-fashioned form of care.
That's the change that has to be somehow subversively introduced into a tyrannical regime. That there are other ways to organize how we can all take care of each other.
Yeah, it's so important. I think one of the much more in my mind, I think it's an idea about the emotional response that care generates. While caregiver may feel a sense of fulfillment, perhaps the care receiver may feel inferior due to dependency to the caregiver. Such an experience can result in a loss of self-confidence or self-esteem. In traditional society, care was mainly provided by family members. Ideally, the power dynamic within the family should ensure a healthy balance of power between those who provide care and those who receive it. But in modern time, the ethical framework, like what you provided, aim to move responsibility of care from private sphere to the public sphere to create a fair, more just society. Does public and political caring ultimately harm care receivers by keeping them independent? By keeping them dependent?
Well, of course, that's the argument that neoliberals make, That, it's so dangerous for people on welfare to depend on the state. Oh, it's so bad for them. No, it isn't. What's really worse is for them to have to depend on someone in a household who behaves tyrannically in the household. Because let's not forget, although you just said the power balances out in the household, it often does not. And often people who are in households are in situations of violence or of control that is really unlivable. It's true for children, it's true for women, it's true for men sometimes, right? So under those conditions, would you want to force people to be in their household because, it's nice for them? No, you wouldn't. So I want to go back, though, to this because there's some assumptions in the statement you just made that I want to unpack a little. First of all, there isn't such a big separation between caregivers and care receivers. All of us are, all of the time, both caregivers and care receivers. Usually, at one point in our life, we are predominantly one or the other. When we're very young, when we're very old, we receive care. When we're in our autonomous, individual way, we are often giving self-care, but it's still care, and caring for others at the same time. But there's always a network of care, and we are receiving care and giving care at the same time. People in the disability movement don't like the word care very much for this reason, that it makes them seem as if they are dependent. But there's a solution to that, which is to think of care more democratically, to think of the goal of care, because care has many goals, right? You care for your child so your child grows up, and you want your child to grow up to be healthy and happy and so on. But you can also ask your child to grow up to be committed to democracy. And if you do, then as an adult, your child will then say to her children, how can I raise my children to be more democratic? And so then you can perpetuate ideas like democracy. So there are different goals of care, and one of those goals can be to make society more equal and to not support bullying, violence, controlling people in ways that are harmful. And so, too, I say to my colleagues in the disability movement, we can think of care from the standpoint of what people who are engaged in care for disabled people themselves and others want and need. And, of course, disabled people also help to care for themselves and for their friends and for others. And this, it just keeps going in a circle. Some Irish scholars recently were interviewing people, and they said, why do we call it care? Why don't we just call it living together? And there is a way in which that's actually a more accurate description, right, of what's going on. There's a person in the house who has Downs, but we're just living together. It's not that we're caring for her. We're just a family. Yeah.
And this is the necessity of having a much mutual relationship in care, which create that balance that I think it's necessary to have a successful care.
Right. And if you have a household structure where some people never do any of the care work and never touch the dirt and never deal with the crying or the hunger or the anger or all of that, they're much less able to cope with the kinds of challenges that come up.
We had a discussion with Professeur Tronto before our podcast about this impossibility of find the word in Persian in our language for care.
Interesting.
Because care is really directly is about this affection about somebody, but this dirty side of care is we have not any a word about that, and it's perhaps it's a devalorization of care, ultimate devalorization of care in our culture, because care, it's only this affection that mother have for her son or I don't know, her father, something like that. But this dirty side of care is not have a word in your language.
That's so interesting. It's so interesting because English is the first language I know. It's the only language I know really well. But it's the first language where the word has these complicated meanings. It can mean its opposite, really. I care for you, but also cares and woes means burdens.
Exactly.
Yeah? So it's a very broad meaning. The first people in the world who asked me to come speak about care were in Holland. Because the word zorg in Dutch has the same double meaning of English care. In German, the word Sorge does not mean the same thing as it does in
French.
And in French, too, the word care is
soin.
We need so many words.
Yes, souci.
To translate care.
Yeah.
Soin, souci, soigner, oui, prendre responsabilité, être attentionné.
All these, there isn't a single word that captures all the meanings in French either. And it's part of the reason why the reception in French is a little different than the reception in Holland is a little different than the reception in Spanish, where, again, the word cuidado means care, but it also means watch out. And there are also other words in Spanish that mean the actual provision of physical care.
I think another example about care, it is this relation between human and nature, which is so important. And I think in this case, we have a balanced relation between humans and nature, because without nature, humans cannot exist, and nature also take care of humans despite its needs to be to be taken care of. However, in normal social condition, there is no such balance of power normally. You have this book, Who Cares? I wanted to ask you this question: Who can care? In a society, because caring normally is related to social status. this possibility that somebody can have to care. For example, an immigrant really he or she could be change the situation and give care in a society.
Immigrants do care. Mm-hmm. I mean, they do most of the care work. Yeah, mm-hmm. They do a lot of care work. Mm-hmm. So they do care. Mm-hmm. Yes. I want to go back to this question about nature and humans, though, as balanced, mm-hmm. because at least in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in the Old Testament of the Bible, mm-hmm. In the original garden, mm-hmm. God gives humans dominion over the animals and gives Adam the right to name the animals. Mm-hmm. It's a very it's not an equal relationship at all. Okay, so how much does that carry into our attitudes? I don't know. Others would say it's the nature of capitalism to take advantage of nature, that nature is viewed as a gift. Marx says this. Marxists like Nancy Fraser has just written a book called Cannibal Capitalism, mm-hmm. where she argues that capitalism takes advantage of the natural and of unpaid care work. Mm-hmm. So it's possible to see that there is this exploitation in society that has other justifications. But I'm with you. I think there's a balance.
No, I think we as humans, we understand that. There is a balance. Because without that, we cannot resolve this crisis, ecological crisis.
Well, okay,
we
so
need to that.
There's a difference between this is what we really should think and this is what we do think.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It's what we should think, but I'm not sure it is what we do think yet.
Yes.
There's a book written by Maria Puig de la Bellacasa, who makes the claim that the problem with my definition of care is that I begin by saying, Berenice Fisher and I began by saying it's a species activity. Mm-hmm. And she says, no, it's not only humans who care, everything cares. Animals care for each other, and sometimes animals care for humans. Plants care, she writes about soil and the way pieces of soil interact with each other in a way that she wants to describe as care. So once you start looking for care, you will see it everywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In my example, I try to say that normally in a social setting, care receiver, the relation between caregiver and care receiver is one direction.
Yes.
But in a relation between humans and nature, humans now, we hope so, to understand that we dependent also to nature.
Yeah.
And that will be a hope to success in this kind of care.
Okay, so now I will be the pessimist and say, but then some people think that the solution is a technological one. Okay, there's too much greenhouse gases. We will build gigantic umbrellas in the sky, and we will block enough sunlight so that the world doesn't overheat. Mm. You have no idea what we're doing, right? But that's what they propose. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily the case that it will work out this way. Mm-hmm. It would be nice if you were right. Let's hope.
Let's hope. Exactly.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important aspect of your work is about the activity or passivity of care receivers or caregivers. I have this opinion or sentiment when I read your book that it is we have a passivity in care receivers in your book. For example, the question is who should initiate the process of providing care. In your conception of care, 4 or 5 phases of providing care, we have a very active caregiver who is responsible to judge about the need of care receiver, and even after the care, she or he is responsible to evaluate the result. I don't know. I think we have a really passive conception of care receiver? Where is the place of care receiver in defining or announcing his or her need and evaluate the result of care?
Yes, no, you're quite right. It's a problem of writing, not of conception, because I do mean for us to think of care receivers as also extremely active in receiving care. Everybody is both active and passive at once. Yeah, you have to be passive to receive the needs of others. So the caregiver being attentive, as Simone Weil says, what it means to be attentive is to empty yourself and accept the other. Right? So there's a way in which it's an ongoing duality of acting and being a recipient, and acting and being a recipient. It's the same for the care receiver, and the care receiver must both be active and receiving. Yeah. So there are different this isn't my work initially, but it's the work of a Norwegian sociologist named Kari Vares, who makes the argument that there's a difference between care which is necessary for you to receive from someone else and care which is a service that you receive from somebody else. And so this comes back to this question of the relative power of care receivers and caregivers. Caregivers are more powerful than care receivers under the conditions of necessary care. When you are a child and you need an adult to take care of you, you need an adult to take care of you. When you're sick with a brain problem, you need a doctor to take care of you. Even if you're a brain doctor yourself, you need a brain doctor to take care of you. Yeah. On the other hand, in personal service, often the person who is asking for the care is the powerful one. So when I don't do this. If someone hires a migrant worker to come to their house to clean or watch their children, they could fire that person and do that job themselves. Yeah. Or pay that person less or pay that person more, depending upon how decent they want to be about it. And that is a power that they have over this person who wants to sell them this service. So when you're in a situation where you're hiring someone to do a service, the power relationship somewhat switches. Yeah. And in societies where it's all dirty and it's all bad, think about the power dynamic that creates, where there will never be a switch in the relative power movement. So I all along, I should have emphasized this more, but all along there is both receiving and giving care, and all along there is both passivity and activity in the practices of care. It could not be otherwise.
You started your much more recent book, Care in Democracy, about this, about your hope for this ethic of care, but by speaking about agnostic democracy. Perhaps this agnostic democracy is much more, I don't know, performant. Why? Because it gives this active role to care receivers to announce their need and participate actively in society.
That's right.
I wanted to ask you about agnostic democracy.
I haven't really thought about that category in a while. What do you want me to say?
About this relationship, this two conception of care. Society, a society which is based on care, and society which is based on this...
On competition.
Exactly. No, this conflict. You know, this announcing...
Oh, okay. There will... Look, care is very complex. There will always be conflict in care. You can't put a child to bed without a conflict, right? There's always conflict in care. And they will never be resolved. And people have different ideas about the best ways to care. Those are real conflicts that will continue. The question is, can we create the conditions where those conflicts are in the open and either resolved or go on the way they have to? as opposed to making presumptions about the correct way and shutting people down or closing people off or, frankly, harming people.
Mm-hmm. For example, this movement, Wall Street Occupy movement, it is for you. It is an example of care, or it's an example of caring democracy.
Which Occupy?
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy movements may be movements for caring democracy,
Mm-hmm.
because their goal is to create conditions commoning all those practices, are attempts to make societies in which the people engaged care for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is what's interesting to me is how much the language of care in recent years, I mean really the last couple of years, how much the language of care has become a part of movement vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are part of a movement for social change, you also realize that you have to be caring
Mm-hmm.
towards the members of the movement,
Mm-hmm.
and caring for the thing that you are attempting to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no longer just about justice or about a principle, it's about also the caring that has to come with it to embody that principle in your life.
I think in this social movement, there are much more care receivers also. They are much more creative and active in providing and receiving in the same time. I think the problem here is the creation, this mutual relationship between the care receiver and caregivers in all time.
That's what care is about relationships. And ultimately, and this is the hardest philosophical part for me, ultimately what this way of looking at the world requires us to do is to see relationships as the fundamental categories in which we understand the world. Rather than seeing the world relationally, rather than seeing the world in terms of principles or in terms of substances.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult for me, even though I keep saying this, to understand what I'm saying. Because I'm so tied to thinking of things, and this belongs here, and this belongs there, and that belongs there. But really, it's the fact that if you put this here and this here, they are in this relationship, which is different than if you put them closer together.
Mm-hmm.
Different if you put them further away. And it's in this quality of understanding how relationships work that we really come to understand what care is about. Mm-hmm. And which leads us to the final conception of the morality of all this, which is it's an openness to all of these different kinds of relationships. Some will be more strong, some will be weaker, but it's an openness that makes it possible for us to really be more.
Mm-hmm. In Moral Boundaries, you wrote to play, to fulfill a desire, to market a new product, or to create a work of art is not care.
I know I was wrong.
About art, why is art excluded for?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of things that weren't care, but I think I'm wrong. Those things can be care in very fundamental ways. Not only can art be care, but my colleagues teach me care can be an art.
Mm-hmm.
The name escapes me at the moment, but the work on care aesthetics that is going on is really quite beautiful, and makes the argument that when you see a worker help a person who has a physical disability move, the person who does it well does it with a way that is beautiful. They just know how to make things happen so that this moves, and it all looks so smooth, and it's beautiful. And that's the only language you can use. It's an aesthetic language that you'd use. So I'm wrong. Care is about beauty as well. And art can be caring. Yeah. At the very least, art is reflecting the care of the artist. Yes.
About a social problem.
Whatever it is that motivated the artist to create
artist
this
care
work.
in creating work of art.
Yeah. I don't know why I excluded that. My father was a carpenter, and he made things that he made for us as children, say, that he did because he cared. Yeah? Right? Yeah.
For me, it's the ultimate gest of care.
Yeah. When I wrote this book in 1993, this is already 30 years ago, I would be criticized all the time. Where's the edge? What's beyond care? If everything's care, then it's nothing. Well, actually, I've now come to think, yes, everything is care, so just stop. Telling me I have to give you an edge. It's a classic philosophical question, right? What's not that? I don't know. Ask Aristotle. He'll tell you.
Exactly. I have a question about the reception of your work.
Yes.
Why your theory of care is more discussed in social science rather than philosophy?
Well, I am a social scientist, and most philosophers find me fuzzy-headed and not very, I don't know where the edge is. How can I have a conception I thought of for my whole life and I don't know where the edge is? I must obviously not be a very clear, serious thinker, right? What can I tell you? I also started from a more social scientific perspective. And, of course, the activities of care are more closely investigated by people in the social sciences, such as sociology, anthropology, even political science. Yeah.
That's interesting. About the role of women in philosophy or social science, could you share your experience? As a woman studying and teaching political philosophy at a university in the US, what made you decide to become a political philosopher?
Oh, that's a good question. Why did I decide to become a political theorist in the first place? Yeah. I wanted to understand things about the political world. Yeah. It grows out of a personal experience. My father had started a small business as a carpenter. He was going to build houses, and the business failed. And it wasn't until I was in college, 10 years later, that I studied the history of economic life in the U.S. and realized that my father was trying to start a business at precisely the moment when there was a decision made by the economists way up there to make it more difficult for people to borrow money to build houses. And so his business failed. And I realized that power to understand what had happened was a real power. And it would be wonderful to be able to understand those things of the world more so that I could help people understand what was happening to their lives and maybe make them better. What I write at the beginning of Moral Boundaries is the political crisis in which I grew up was the war in Vietnam. And what I had been taught all my life, of course, that America was a moral and wonderful place. And here we were engaged in a truly horrific imperial project. How could this be? Well, I know now, but how could it had always been that? But never mind. How could I come to understand this? And that was kind of what motivated me to study politics. It was this very personal feeling suddenly of having power because I understood, and then this big problem of not being able to understand why things were the way they were that made me want to do this. Yeah, but I thought of studying philosophy, but it just didn't seem as engaged in the world. I couldn't do it. Yeah, I grew up in a working class family. I wanted to change the world.
About if you want, share your experience as a woman studying.
Oh yeah, so as a woman studying political science, I was able to do what I did in part because I had very supportive, mostly male professors. A few male professors who were just really supportive of me. There were times in my career when different guys tried to get rid of me And somehow they didn't succeed. I think that's the right way to put it. It's not as bad now as it was, in part because there are more women, especially in the United States, who are doing this kind of work. Not because of me. Because of a whole set of changes that I was able to participate in. But it's easier now, but it's still not easy or the same. There's still kind of a deference to a kind of authority that males bring to these things. Mm-hmm. And there's a deference to a kind of, and this was a decision I made early in my career, and it's still, early in my career I decided I wasn't going to use academic jargon. I wasn't going to try to make my ideas the most complex I could so that nobody else could understand them, because what I wanted to do was reach people like me, mm-hmm. who came to academic work wanting to understand the world, mm-hmm. And who were not necessarily adept at all of that use of jargon. I think this has actually hurt me in my career. But people don't pay that much attention to me, really. I mean, I'm always shocked when people pay attention to my ideas. And it's certainly in the discipline of political science, I have less impact than many others. Mm-hmm. Is that because my ideas aren't as good? Maybe. But I think it may also be the style of discussion. It always makes me extremely happy when students say to me, I can understand your ideas mm-hmm. very clearly, and they're very moving to me, mm-hmm. because I understand them. But I do wonder, well, what do the other people think they're doing, right, in ways that are so inaccessible and difficult? Mm-hmm. Is it that the world is that difficult and I'm just stupid and don't see it? Maybe it's both.
How do you? Okay. Do you have hope for social movement?
Oh, I do. Okay, so we're in a moment. We're in this moment of tremendous backlash. Mm-hmm. More tyranny, more tyrannical regimes, more just plain cruelty towards other humans mm-hmm. everywhere in the world, visible now. It's partly because we're living in a very precarious time. People are very frightened, and with good reason, because we have really messed things up. But this backlash will not last forever, and we will go forward again. That's what I really do hope. Not only hope, I believe it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, Saleh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our viewers, and until the next episode. Goodbye.
Bye.